So today we're going to be talking about installing a wood burning stove, costs and processes, and what's really involved.
So I'm going to be speaking to an expert a little bit later in this episode, but we actually did replace our two wood burning stoves. Plus we actually had one put in the studio.
Yeah.
So we have gone through the process of actually doing both.
3 times.
And 3 times. And I do think that it is actually quite an involved process. It wasn't a quick kind of, half a day job. It was a lot of time that the guys actually spent here working on the flues, building the stacks. So, again, it just comes down to, as with all things in life, if you want to get something done properly, you've got to get the right people to come in and do that.
And I think also there was a lot of planning. I really liked the guy that we chose and we went with. He turned up, he had been recommended. He was a local recommendation, which I think adds value in itself. We went into our local wood burning stove shop and they only kind of sold the real minimalist, Swedish kind of really funky modern designs. And they said, if you're looking for the traditional, you should go down to this other shop, which was actually out of town. It was a good kind of half an hour, 45-minute drive for us. And they said, go down to him. He's really good. He's got an excellent reputation. He really knows his stuff. And we went down and met him and immediately knew that they had a huge showroom. We walked around the showroom. They really spoke and answered every single question we had. They explained how we choose the right size of wood burning stove for your room. That was something that never occurred to me. I just thought that all wood burning stoves were kind of like, you just get one. But no, you need to actually choose the size that you want for that room, because you don't actually want to get a wood burning stove that's too big and overheating that room unnecessarily, or undersize it and then you're never actually really getting that room to temperature. So you do need to really give it some proper thought. And they were really good at guiding us around the showroom and telling us for which rooms we were going to change up the wood burning stoves, or which ones were most appropriate, which ones we should be considering. So you just want to make sure that you really take your time to make the right choice. So let's see what Sune has to say to you and what expert tips he's got for us.
Hi, Sune. Thanks so much for joining us today. I think the most important question that we need to get answered today is, if somebody is considering fitting a wood-burning stove, what is the installation process like?
Sure. Well, they'll want to get in contact with a competent person stove installer. Usually that's a HEATAS stove installer. If they've got an existing chimney, it's quite likely that that'll want to be lined and insulated. If they don't have an existing chimney, then they'll be putting up a twin-wall chimney system, which can just goes together like Meccano, essentially. It's pretty easy. Or you may be in something like a passive house or a very well insulated house, in which case you'd go for a pumice chimney liner system, which has a 0 mil distance to combustible materials, which makes it really easy to run through highly insulated roofs without burning them, which is always a plus point. The other consideration you'd have is whether you live in a smoke control area or not. That dictates the type of stove that you would be allowed to buy. If you're in a smoke control area, it has to be DEFRA exempt. Essentially, that means it's gone through additional testing. You can't turn a DEFRA exempt stove down. It has a stop on the air damper, and that stops the stove really making a lot of smoke. So it's better for more densely populated areas. Hence their smoke control areas. So it's not just the stove, although you'll want to look at the stove and find one that you really like. There's also the whole chimney to pay for and the labour to pay for. So it's not just the ticket price of the stove. So people may have also read quite a bit about particulate emissions that stoves make, and it's a really important issue to tackle. Stoves now all have to be EcoDesign certified, which means they have a maximum level of particulate emissions. So you can ask the manufacturer to see what that level of particulate emissions is. The maximum level is 40. So if you want to compare stoves against each other, ask for what the particulate emissions level is. You can also light your fire upside down, which means putting bigger logs first, then some kindling, then the fire lighters. And that's been lab tested to produce less particulates, because particulates happen when there's improper combustion. Just like your car, if it's not got enough fuel or too much air or too little air, you'll get black deposits. Same with a stove. So what you want is the firebox to get nice and hot fast, and then the fire moved down to those bigger logs. So that's what the upside down method does. Additionally, never turn it down for the night. People often talk about that. That's terrible for making a lot of smoke. And if you live in a very densely populated area that's not meeting its air quality targets, maybe consider not having a stove. On the other hand, if you're using an open fire and you're considering upgrading to a stove, then the open fire is going to be producing at least 90% more emissions than the stove you're upgrading to.
Brilliant. I mean, that's the way that we actually light our fires. We do the top-down method. We just find it the easiest way to actually light the fire, and I had no idea that it actually reduced your particulate matter emissions too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we changed all our guidance to it on the basis of that. There was a lab test in Germany. I had it once. I don't have it anymore. But
a big question for homeowners is, how much does a wood burner cost? So what are the major factors that actually contribute towards the cost of that wood burner installation?
Sure. So a stove will probably start from about £400 or £500 up to, how long's a bit of string, but typically £2,000, depending on what type of model you're going for. Then the chimney system, again, depending on what type of chimney system you're going for, may cost in the region of, again, £1,000 to £2,000, something like that. And then you've got installation on top, which probably starts at about £650, £700 and up, depending on the complexity of the job. If the installer has to get a cherry picker or scaffolding in to get up to the top of your roof, then that's obviously going to add to the cost. If it's a very well sealed house, then you might need to put in direct air ducts and automatic air controllers, and the installer might have to carry out additional risk assessments. Again, that's going to add to the cost. And if it's a boiler stove, then that adds a whole other element to the cost again, because you're going to have a pump system, some control stats, and possibly a thermal store.
So is it possible to fit a wood burner into a property without a chimney?
It's not possible to fit a wood burner without a chimney, but if you don't have a chimney, it's possible to build a new one quite easily from twin wall chimney systems, which are more or less like Meccano. They just sort of screw together and have components that fix to the wall and take you through floors and roofs and that sort of thing.
So is it cheaper to install one of these Meccano style chimneys than it is to actually build a proper chimney breast with flues and everything else?
Absolutely, yes. Because the labour cost of a brick stack is going to be high. Additionally, if you're building a new chimney, then you can't be putting a liner down it, which is a metal tube, which you'd put insulation around the outside of. So if you were building a new masonry chimney, I'd be advising you to put something called pumice liners down the inside, which are highly insulating liners that can withstand the temperatures of a chimney fire and keep those flue gases nice and hot. That's going to add to the cost again, though.
What should people know about wood burner external flue regulations?
So in terms of regulations, if you're not in a conservation area and not in a listed building, then you can get the installation done and signed off by a competent person. Usually that would be a HETAS registered installer who can sign that off. There are other schemes out there as well, though, but HETAS is by far the most dominant one. You can also, if you've got a building regs officer coming around, you can also commonly get them signed off under building control. However, there's quite a few local authorities who need you to have the competent person sign that off. So best to check with your planning authority.
So I've seen a couple of chimney installations where the flues are at varying heights on the actual outside. Is there regulation for how high or how low they need to be out above or below the actual roof line?
Yes, there is. There are regulations for how high that flue has to be above the roof line. Essentially, if I say to people, if you were to get a cat and swing it around on a 2.5 metre rope, then its whiskers should be brushing the roof. Not that you'd want to do that to a cat. No. Also, there's minimum heights. There's a height you should go above the ridge if you're near the ridge, and there's a distance away from openable windows if you've got roof lights. You'll find all of those in a handy diagram in document J of the building regs, which you'll find online. So just find yourself the relevant page in there in the PDF, and there's a little picture.
So if you're putting a chimney in and you need to build a chimney breast, you obviously need to factor in the price for that labor. materials. You obviously need to factor in the price of the actual wood burning stove itself. Are there any other additional costs that people should be aware of?
There's not that many additional costs that I can think of. There's some ancillary equipment that you might want to put in, such as air ducts, air vents, automatic controllers. There's a few bits and pieces like CO2, carbon monoxide alarms that you have to put in. Other than that, not particularly.
So you've given us a ballpark price for the actual installation of the wood burning stove and the chimney. So could you just give us a bit of a breakdown so that people can be more or less aware as to how much the labor costs, how much the wood burning stove will be, and all those kind of bits and pieces?
Sure. So your stove will be starting out at somewhere around about £500 and up, depending on how fancy you get. You can get 10 grand stoves if you really want. But the majority of stoves are somewhere between the 500 and 2.5 grand sort of band. Then your chimney is likely the materials for your chimney are likely to cost you £1,000 up to £2,000 depending on the complexity of it, and labour is likely to cost you £650, £700 and up. Again, depends on the complexity. The more bends there are, the whether they need to get up on the roof with a cherry picker, if access is hard, all that sort of thing will add to the cost.
So Sune, thank you so much for coming on and answering these questions for us. If somebody wants to contact you, how can they go about doing that?
So our website's quite easy to remember because it's called Stoves Online, and my email address is a funny spelling, so it's SUNE, that's SUNE at stovesonline.co.uk. We're all first name at here in the team.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Sune. Bye-bye. So the key is to get your wood burning stove installed by a HEATUS approved installer and get the best possible stove that you can on your budget. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.